Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
There are many ways we collaborate with each other to be the church we're called to be and to serve how we serve. And our contributing financially is one of the most important of those ways. If you want to help fund and sustain what we get to do together, go to crosspoint.org/contribute to see the many simple ways that you can do so. You can even text crosspointenc to 77977 to receive a link to get started now. Thank you for your partnership in the work we do together.
Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations of your family and your children broken. Believe me, my heart should know. Some prayers are better left unspoken. I just wanna hold you and let the rest go. Oh, my friends are part saint and part sinner. We lean on each other and try to rise above. We are not afraid to admit we're all still beginners. We're all late bloomers when it comes to love. Oh, my favorite people are broken. Believe me, my heart should know. Orphan believers and skeptical dreamers, step forward. You don't have to go. Is each wound you received just a burdensome gift? It gets so hard to lift yourself up off the ground. But the poet says we must praise this mutilated world. We're all working the graveyard shift. You might as well sing along. Oh, my favorite people are broken. Believe me, my heart should know. As for your tender heart, the world's gonna rip it wide open. It ain't gonna be pretty, but you're not alone. 'Cause all my favorite people are broken. Believe me, my heart should know. Orphan believers and skeptical dreamers, you're welcome. You don't have to go. 'Cause all my favorite people are broken. Believe me, my heart should know. Some prayers are better left unspoken. I just wanna hold you and let the rest go.
Most of us have heard of the parable of lost things, although we might not call them by that name. So the story basically goes that religious leaders were upset with Jesus, like they usually are, grumbling about his hanging out with tax collectors and sinners. But instead of this long lecture about purpose or their hypocrisy, Jesus responds to them by telling 3 parables, the parables of the lost things. And you can find this particular telling of these stories in the Gospel of Luke, the 15th chapter. First, Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep. A man was counting the 100 sheep he was responsible for, perhaps putting them away for the night, when he realized one was missing. So he left the 99 contented, happy sheep, went into the dark wilderness, and searched until he found the missing one. The man picked up the sheep, placed it on his shoulders, and brought it home. And then he called all of his friends and let them know he found the missing sheep. And they all celebrated. And we aren't actually clear if they knew the sheep was missing in the first place, but regardless, they were happy to be a part of the celebration anyway. Then Jesus tells the story of the woman who had 10 coins, 10 drachma. She counted them, realized one was missing, dropped what she was doing, lit a candle, grabbed her broom, and swept around the dirt floor of her home until she found it. Then she called all of her friends, let them know she had found the missing coin, and they all celebrated. And we aren't actually sure if they knew that the coin was missing in the first place. But regardless, they too were happy to be a part of the celebration anyway. And then there's the most famous of the 3 stories, the story of the lost son. And the story goes, there was a father with 2 sons. The youngest requested his inheritance. He cashed it out. He went to live far away, and he spends his money on all kinds of frivolous things. Times weren't great. There was a famine in the land, and soon the son found himself penniless, starving, and without the support that he was used to from home, the support of his father, of his brother, of his household. And at the bottom of the bottom, he came to his senses when he was forced to share dinner with the pigs. So he collected himself, headed home, threw himself on the mercy of his fathers, asking simply to be allowed into his father's house as a servant. But the father runs to the son, threw his arms around him, welcoming him back. Then the father calls his friends. He lets them know he found his missing son. And they all celebrated. Everyone, that is, except for the oldest brother. He did not feel that things had been handled fairly. He wanted a punishment to fit the crime, or at least the heartache that his younger brother had put them through. Why the celebration? Why did the wayward brother get a party when he, the devoted son, did not? And the father replied, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours," notice, he defines the relationship, "this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and he has been found." It's such a short chapter, really. 31 verses, and it's basically right in the middle of the Gospel of Luke, almost framing and giving a foundation for the rest of what Jesus talks about. And we've all heard at least one of these stories many times, I'm sure. They're beautiful, beautiful reminders of how important lost things are. But as I was thinking about them and listening to them this week and last week, there's a few things that I wanted to point out. First, it seems that the main point in these stories isn't the losing of things, but the finding of them and what happened kind of in between. We're not told how the things got lost in the first place. Now, you might pause for a minute and make the argument that we know that the youngest son chose his own lostness, but really, any of us who has ever been a parent or has had a relationship with another human being understands that people are much more nuanced than blame usually is. We don't know the family's history of the son. We don't know the dynamics in the home. We don't know what type of parent the father was. We don't know where the mother was. We don't know what pushed the son to leave in the first place. But also the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son seem to have little value except to their owners or the father. I mean, in the shepherd's case, it's likely that the sheep didn't even belong to the man who went looking for it, because people who had means to own livestock during that time rarely took care of them themselves. Instead, they hired other people to do that dirty and dangerous job of facing the elements and the wild animals and getting dirty. Shepherds also didn't have a particularly good reputation in society at that time either. They were considered shiftless, they were thieving, they were trespassers. And this is perhaps why Jesus started with this parable of the shepherd and his trio of stories. Because the shepherd wasn't regarded as much better than the tax collector, which was what the religious leaders were grumbling about in the first place. Why was Jesus hanging out with the tax collectors and the sinners? The shepherd's right about on that level, or maybe on the level of the despised Samaritan that we read about in other of Jesus' stories. Religious leaders were already complaining about the company Jesus kept, but instead of making excuses for his choice of company, Jesus put those that society held in contempt at the center of his story, as the hero, as the heroine. And perhaps Jesus recalled that stories circulating about his own birth announcement started with shepherds in a field. And it begs the question for me, who are the shepherds in our society today? We don't have shepherds running around. Who do we put in these lowest of society classes? The felon, the young black man, the single mother on welfare, the addict, the individual born outside of the United States? The answer is likely different for all of us, but we can take a look around us and quickly put someone in that spot. And the shepherd likely didn't have any special claim on this particular sheep. There's some extra biblical traditions that suggest that the lost sheep may have been the biggest of the pack, and that's why the men went to search for it, or maybe it was the best. But a loss of any sheep could have cost the shepherd his job. It definitely would have justified the rumors about the unreliability of shepherds. Perhaps the importance of finding the sheep was that it meant the shepherd would keep his job and therefore be able to feed his family. Perhaps the man simply had a connection with this particular sheep, or perhaps he wanted to do his job really well. That's the thing about parables. They leave us with more questions than answers. But regardless of the reason the shepherd went to find the sheep, its recovery and its return to the larger flock was worth celebrating. From the information we get from the third story, the wayward youngest son wasn't of much value to anybody either. In fact, it seems he probably cost his family more than he contributed. And the eldest son made clear toward the end of the story that he wasn't worth the money and the time spent on the fatted calf, on the barrels of celebratory beverage, on the DJ, on this party. Who was celebrating him anyway? Perhaps no one but the father and the father's friends, and then everybody else just wanted a free party. But the father found value in his costly son. We don't know if the father always had felt this way about his youngest son, but we know that he did when the son came home. And perhaps the story is simply more commentary on the father's parenting and the father's growth than the son's faults. But when the son returned home, the father had another chance to make things right. Now, both the story of the lost sheep and of the lost son, they've been fodder for religious imagery and art throughout history. We love to see Jesus as the strong, searching shepherd, likely with a six-pack and biceps for days, with the strength to carry a sheep, all of lost humanity on his shoulders, dressed in white, flowing hair. Can you picture it? This was in my Sunday school book when I was a kid. Or we imagine Jesus as a father with the strength of an old man who has worked hard his whole life, building a home, building an empire, building a reputation that could afford a huge celebratory party, one that would outlast the bad reputation of his son. beard gray with age and wisdom, but still strong enough to run down the drive to meet and embrace his son. We love imagining Jesus in this way. But contrast this, however, with the parable sandwiched between these two narratives. If God is a shepherd and a father, then in the middle story, God is a woman. And Simone de Beauvoir describes her as a sweeper woman, a housewife, equivalent basically to the modern day Sisyphus, the man that had to spend eternity rolling a rock uphill slowly, only to have to do it again and again, day after day for eternity, which sounds much like the daily grind of the woman in the home. And housework is the job that is never truly complete. It begins anew every morning. The woman is missing a coin, a drachma, equivalent to basically one day's wage, and she admits that she is the one that lost it. The coin didn't go wandering away like the sheep or the son. And what does this say about God who misplaced the coin? The woman, likely poor, could not live with even one coin missing. Because if it wasn't found, the woman couldn't eat. She couldn't pay rent. She couldn't go on living. It's likely that the value of the coin was a really insignificant amount to some people, but it held incredible value to the woman who lost it. And contrasting the image of God as this strong shepherd and wise father, this story imagines God as sweeper woman. Her skirts hiked up, her neck strained, her back bent, and her arms outstretched, lighting a candle, not because it's necessarily night outside, but because her home she lives in is one of the poorest of the poor, with a dirt floor, with a low ceiling, with a low door, probably with little to no window light, and definitely no money to pay someone else to do the sweeping and the searching. This sweeper woman, God, gets into the dirt, looks for what is lost, looks for what she cannot live without. And this sweeper woman, God, has strength that's different from that of the father and the shepherd. Hers is a strength of mind and of will, strength of a back that has worked day in and day out with little recognition. Her voice isn't loud. It's not been recognized throughout history too much in paintings or in songs and art. This is sweeper woman God, who doesn't need recognition in order to understand the importance of her finding that which is lost. Think about it. So often we don't recognize the value of something until it's gone, until we can no longer access it when we want it or need it. I'm reminded of this every day when I lose my phone and my keys. And there's a time in between when what we have lost and when we either find it again or we reconcile that it won't be ours again. There's a place between the losing and the finding or the reconciling. We always place something in the gap while we wait for the hole of loss to be filled. Perhaps it's hope, as we expect for something or someone to be restored to us. Perhaps it's anger or blame, but something grows in us in that gap. The question is, what is it that we allow to grow while we hope, while we wait, while we grieve, while we accept? What did the father learn about himself, about his other son, about his choices while he grieved the loss of his younger son? We don't know if he searched for the son, if he counted him as dead. What grew in the shepherd as he searched for the one lost sheep? Was it hope? Was it despair? What grew in the woman as she accepted responsibility for the loss of her coin and as she swept her home in the near dark? What grew in that gap? Because something always grows there. It's important to note that not everything that's lost to us should be restored. It'll be restored somewhere, but not necessarily to us. And eventually we learn who we really are when we no longer have that thing, whether it's returned to us or not. Or we learn to be different people without it. We learn to live with the consequences of that loss, or the lost thing is restored to us, and then we have a new or renewed understanding of its value. But there's no guarantee over any of those conclusions. There's only control over what we grow in the gap between loss and acceptance. And there are sometimes things and people in our lives that we need to let go of, that we do not need to re-enter our lives because they're unhealthy or unsafe. But even in this type of loss, we hold space and cultivate the gap that's there until it's healthy for something else to grow. What are we growing in those gaps? And the other thing that strikes me about these parables is this theme of celebration. Specifically, the celebration of the restoration of things that are seemingly meaningless. And even more specifically, the call for corporate celebration of those things and people that society deemed unimportant, as insignificant. All three characters weren't doing the celebration on their own. They invited community to celebrate with him, to mark the restoration of the lost things, to be included in the restoration. The community likely wouldn't have noticed a missing coin, wouldn't have noticed the shepherd's one lost sheep or the son who was causing more trouble than they deemed was worth. In fact, some of the neighbors might have even rejoiced in those missing things. Good riddance that boy is gone. That woman is so forceful, so forgetful, she's so unorganized, she can't get herself together. She doesn't even need to be in this neighborhood. What's the big deal with one sheep? There's 99 more. But Jesus' stories offer a different perspective. Things and people that have been deemed insignificant, replaceable, disposable to society. These are the people and the things that are central to God's story, because God does not see them as insignificant. The people with the least amount of power, the ones most easily forgettable, those are the very ones God has deemed worthy of narrative, worthy of celebrating, worthy, of joining in celebration. The insignificance of their lost and then found things, the insignificance in society didn't stop the shepherd and the sweeper woman and the father from celebrating restoration and inviting others to celebrate with them. The things being searched for had no societal value, but they gained value when someone decided they were worth searching for, that they were worth celebrating. And we know celebration happens when the finder determines that something's been found. But celebration also happens when new life is offered to the thing or the person that's been lost. God celebrates both the seeker, the one who's growing something in this gap as they're waiting, and God celebrates the found, the second chances, the new life. And Jesus' stories describe God's kingdom as being made up of both those who have been restored and those who have been doing the seeking and the restoring. All are invited to the celebration as equal participants. But in order to participate in this celebration, we have to put aside our pride and our judgments and our qualifications about who is worth celebrating. The father and the shepherd showed mercy on the son and the sheep, who by most standards didn't deserve compassion or mercy. And the woman offered mercy to herself after losing the coin. God finds all of it worth celebrating. Even the things and the people we sometimes feel are the most insignificant and disposable. Or those things or people that bring that vial of disgust in our mouth. But the thing is, in order to be part of God's celebration, we also have to be participants in God's mercy. As I mentioned a little bit before, parables tend to leave us with more questions than answers, with things to think about, with things to reevaluate, with a different way to be. I want us to think about a few things, to reflect on just a couple of things today. First, what are we growing in the gap? What are we growing in the gaps between our losses and restorations, between our losses and our celebrations? Are there things that we need to let go of in order for new things to grow? Or do we need to grow unshakable hope as we wait for things to be found and restored? Who does our society, our culture, our neighborhood, our families say or deem the lost things? What are the things, who are the people that we should be actively seeking, restoring, and celebrating? Are we participating in both the mercy and the celebration of God? Let us be people who cultivate goodness and wholeness in the gaps between loss and celebration. And let us be people who actively pay attention to the people and the things we should be seeking and restoring and celebrating. Let us go into our world this week with the peace of Christ. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.